old for video games?
You have failed.
The same way, I will destroy you. And my friend is truly dead.
Now this is pod racing.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Jedi Council Chambers. This is the the Graying Jedi podcast. Well, I blew it. This is the Graying Jedi podcast. I am UrzaMaster. Joining me, as always, for the caning I'm about to receive, Jedi Master Psyllium Maas and Lord Uther. Welcome, gentlemen, back to the Jedi Council Chambers. Certainly not engineering section. You know what it has to be? It has to be the mint I just had.
Yes.
Peppermint by Lithium Crystals, straight from the Warp Core. I tell you what, gentlemen, I am excited today to talk about the 14th episode in Season 2 of The Mandalorian. Really a groundbreaker for the series for a lot of reasons. And I'm sure our resident expert, Jedi Master Psyllium Maas, has some great background for us. So, Psyllium Maas, take us away.
Thanks, Star Wars fans in this galaxy and beyond, including those overseas in London, Uzbekistan, Sydney, Australia. We're here for you. The Force is with you. The Mandalorian, Season 2, Chapter 14. Only 2 more after this, friends, until we get to the action-packed second season finale. And this one sets the stage for that. Spoiler alert, even in the episode title, The Tragedy. First aired on December 4th, 2020, which was also during the dark times when everybody was sniffling and sneezing and feeling under the weather. And the holidays were fast approaching, but this one felt like a lump of carbonite by the time you got to the end of it that was left in your stocking. Thankfully, we had some familiar faces to guide us through all the emotional highs and lows of this episode. Tamora Morrison. It can no longer be just a rumor or a fanboy's dream. That's right. He is back as Boba Fett. So you remember him, of course, first introduced in Attack of the Clones, Episode 2, playing Jango Fett. And, of course, Boba was then just a little tadpole. But then he grew up and got angrier and flies around in his ship, which we will always refer to as Slave One, as it was introduced to us in 1980's The Empire Strikes Back. I believe in current times they sort of downplay the name of that ship, and to each his own, but it will always be Slave One, the elephant-eared spacecraft hovering along through the skies and asteroid belts. But we don't stop there. Ming-Na Wen as Fennec Shand. Wait, you ask. Wasn't it in Season 1, Chapter 5 that Fennec Shand met her untimely end at Tatooine to a roguish gunslinger and left for dead? You can check us out on the Graying Jedi. We talked about Fennec Shand and so forth, and what a sad way for that sharpshooting bounty huntress to go. And maybe we don't have all the details of her resurrection, but it looks like she's got gears, wires, and tubing, much like Luke Skywalker's severed hand running through her abdomen. So I'm sure there's a story there worth telling. But all we know is that she's back, and she's grateful for her savior, the aforementioned Boba Fett. So those two are now working together, and that can only mean trouble, right? But then we even have other guest stars from previous shows past. What about Giancarlo Esposito as the evil Moff Gideon? What about Gina Carano as Cara Dune? Or even Katie O'Brien as the still unnamed Imperial officer, Major Domo to Moff Gideon, still referred to in the credits as Comms Officer. But take my word, Graying Jedi fans, don't take your eyes off Katie O'Brien. She will resurface in the most dastardly ways imaginable, perhaps in future chapters to come. The episode was written by Jon Favreau after Dave Filoni took the writing and directing tasks on the previous chapter, The Jedi. So we're back with Favreau at the keyboards. We have a new director, And if you've ever wondered what Quentin Tarantino would do with the Star Wars universe, well, this is your next best thing, because this is basically Quentin Tarantino's cousin, Robert Rodriguez. And we've discussed how, generally speaking, the show brings on different creative talent, and yet there's a unified whole. There is absolutely no mistaking we are watching a Robert Rodriguez production in this episode, in which my fellow members of the council, I'm sure, will go into some detail. If you're not familiar with his work, I was first introduced to him as a USC film student with his micro-budgeted El Mariachi. This was a low-budget Western gun-slinging adventure thriller that he wrote, edited, and directed, and basically financed it by donating his blood for profit, and then put on those profits in his credit card and created this. It was a smash in independent film festivals, got a theatrical release, and then he went on from there, basically joined at the hip with Quentin Tarantino, who had released Reservoir Dogs at the time, and those two ended up teaming up on From Dusk Till Dawn, Desperado. Rodriguez would later team with Johnny Depp for Once Upon a Time in Mexico. He did the Invasion of the Body Snatchers riff, The Faculty. He did Sin City. He launched the successful Spy Kids franchise. He and Tarantino teamed up for Grindhouse, a take on 1970s horror. You know his work. You've seen his work. You've enjoyed his work. And now he gets to play in the Star Wars sandbox. Watch out. Also of note, despite the high number of stormtrooper corpses left in the wake in this episode, and again, my council members will discuss, they only actually had 6 actors in the armor. So they were able to fool us into thinking there were whole divisions and squads of the not very well aimed troopers taking to the hills in what looks suspiciously friends like the Vasquez Rocks area that our Federation friends like to clamber around in. But I just want to get this out. Star Wars knows what's to do when you go on location. They're not just wandering around the rocks on a field trip. They had purpose. And boy, did they have purpose. And I want to hear from Jedi Master Lord Uther about the stunt work, the cinematography. You know, we're a long way from the late 1960s and how they did fight scenes. And there's nobody that can do high adrenaline, high octane action these days like Mr. Rodriguez. So between you and UrzaMaster, tell me what you thought of the bone-crunching, hard-hitting, the tragedy.
Well, I guess I'll go first there, UrzaMaster. Again, going back and watching this and knowing what's going to happen with Boba Fett, it played out a little bit better for me in terms of seeing him use the Tusken Raider staff when he was fighting, when Boba Fett was doing that. You know, seeing that stormtroopers still have a tough time hitting something, even though they're supposed to be these elites or whatever. I don't even know if they're supposed to be elite. They're just foot soldiers. Who knows? Anyway, you know, their aim isn't the best. We've got, you know, a sniper taking out these stormtroopers as they're running up hills. Then they're setting up mortars and they're shooting those off. You know, still kind of coming close. It's a solid episode. I respect it a lot. I like the whole, and I guess I'm going away from the stunt part to, you know, putting Grogu on the rock and seeing him kind of meditate and reaching out through the Force, which we know how that's going to set up a future episode of The Mandalorian as well. Let me go completely away from your question, because why not? And go to my biggest thing that I got from this episode. Great episode, no doubt about it. Again, I love how the relationship continues to build between Grogu and Mando. I think that's another very, very key part. We continue to see the father-son type of bond that's building. Mando is everything we wanted Boba Fett to be, in my opinion. From the armor to how he's talking to his whole plot line, it's everything Boba Fett was so mysterious in Empire Strikes Back, and I felt like they kind of doo-dooed on him a little bit in Return of the Jedi. He goes out literally like a whiny person when his backpack gets hit, and he goes, ah, and he flies into the side of the thing, and he falls into the Sarlacc pit. And I'm like, wait, I thought this guy was supposed to be like this super cool bounty hunter, and his backpack gets hit, and he falls into the Sarlacc pit, and that's it. And Mando was and that's why when they announced the Mandalorian, I'm like, what are they doing? I mean, who wants to see that? And of course, they blow us away with this series, right? Even when he gets his armor back in this episode, and I see them standing there with their armor on, and I know that Mando has more Beskar. I get those parts of it, but you cannot tell me that Mando does not look like 100 times better than Boba Fett does in his armor. I think he looks way better. I can't help it. So that was my slight issue overall with the episode and where it's going. And last but not least, to see the Razor Crest get blown up, I think that hurt me more than anything. Even Grogu getting taken away, because I knew they were going to get the little guy back at some point. I know it's going to happen. That caught me off guard more than anything, because I thought that this ship right here was going to be a legacy ship. We were always going to have this, like the Millennium Falcon. And what happens? They blow it up. They didn't have to do that. It's like when the Firefly, in the movie Serenity, winds up crashing, and that kind of seems to be the end of it. Just broke my heart, because this ship does remind me of Firefly. Yeah, so I just rambled, but again, who cares? Like, that's what we do here. So that's my takeaway. UrzaMaster, save our listeners.
I love the stunt work, and the fight scenes in this episode were fantastic. But to be honest, I actually thought Boba Fett was pretty BA in this episode. I mean, knowing a little bit about where he goes, because I actually stopped watching the Book of Boba Fett a couple episodes in. So when we revisit that, I'll be learning. But I actually felt pretty cool, because Boba Fett's an old man in this episode, and like, I take that into account to a certain extent. Like, he's old. Like, he's not going to be the spry Boba Fett that, in Return of the Jedi, I expected to see. Plus, he was eaten by a Sarlacc. So there's something to be said about that. Like, I feel like I'm going to give him a pass on looking a little haggard. But it was really cool to see sort of Mandalorians team up, in a manner of speaking. And it was neat to see kind of this sort of motley crew fighting an impossible fight against these hapless stormtroopers, which I'd been waiting to see this hapless stormtrooper battle for a while. I don't know. I get such joy out of seeing stormtroopers fail. I was actually a little surprised they ended up kidnapping Grogu. The reaching out in the Force thing to me was really cool, but I didn't quite get it at the time. Of course, that answer comes later. So looking back on it now, I'm like, okay, this is actually a really cool moment. The Razor Crest for me was like, it kept getting beat up all the time, but I will say it was a bit of a Star Trek 3 moment. I really was like, oh man, like that was, I kind of thought that was going to be the ship, it was going to be like the House and Family Matters, where it's like Mandalorian and Grogu. Yeah, because they had such good times, but I do like the idea of Mando not necessarily being, he's a bit of a Ronin, right? He doesn't really have a home, and this, of course, really comes full bear later, and I think this is foreshadowing in a way. Now looking back, it's like, if this is what they meant by foreshadowing Mando losing his home through this process of growing close to the child, it really it becomes that much more powerful. And that to me was one of the biggest redeeming qualities here. Obviously, there's other growth that Mando goes through that we'll see in later episodes that makes him even better, which I didn't think you could do at this point in the series. But yeah, overall, this is just a real winner of an episode. I honestly don't have that much to say about it. It was entertaining from start to finish. It felt like I was watching a Rodriguez movie, for sure. But in that same vein, it was only in the sense of how entertaining it was that it felt like Rodriguez. Otherwise, it was very firmly planted in Star Wars. And that is something that The Mandalorian has not failed in this whole time. I plug into this show and I am full bore in Star Wars. Like, at no point am I like, I'm watching something kind of Star Wars-y, which was my biggest fear of it not being a movie. Even the prequels and now sequels, even those movies, when you watch them, you're immersed. I think it's the theater experience somewhat, but you really don't feel like you're watching like a parody or like an adjacent Star Wars idea, which, you get away from Skywalkers and Jedi and the Empire, and it starts to feel a little bit detached from what Star Wars is. So this episode reminded me at how successful this is to be an entry in the Star Wars canon.
All right, real quick on the Razor Crest, because I've been waiting all week to hear the mournful tone of Jedi Master Lord Uther when this moment happened. You're Moff Gideon, and you want to ensure that the audience wants to reach through the screen and strangle him like you did William Zabka in the original Karate Kid. Well, he can either kill someone who's close to the Mandalorian, or he can, do something like that will also cause damage. And in this case, they chose the ship, and I think it's probably the wisest choice, even though I too, as you say, was distraught to see such a beloved conveyance of transport there. But we get Slave One for a few episodes, so that's not exactly a terrible thing there. Let's talk about the episode's endings real quick, because we have a couple. We had the attempt to foreshadow a new backdoor pilot with Cara Dune, who, since the last time we saw her when they stopped off at Navarro in chapter 9, 10, 12, she was approached by the New Republic to take on the cause and be a marshal of the New Republic. And now apparently she's taken the job. And that will also leave a very open-ended storyline that, as we in the real world know, may not go much further, but at least in the Star Wars universe, we now have an excuse to send her off to parts unknown. So that happened here. We had a throwback to Bill Burr. You'll remember Mayfield from Chapter 6, when he was part of that absolutely reprehensible heist crew trying to break out a prisoner and then betraying Mando and so forth. They're looking for Mayfield, and I suspect that search may lead us somewhere in the not-too-distant future. So that's a nice callback there. But then let's talk about the Moff Gideon Grogu showdown. Now, in a recent Graying Jedi that we just touched upon here at the Council, make sure you're checking your subscribe buttons for us talking about Chapter 13, we posited what would happen if Grogu himself broke bad. And is that something even within the realm of possibility? Well, once again here, whether you think it's just a delighted child just stretching his powers, or whether you think there's actual malice as he chokes out and body slams and force throws poor stormtroopers in his cell, at least the potential is there. Like that, hey, he's not just a cute toddler of 50 years old of his species. He can actually cause bodily harm. And that, coupled with, again, that bone-crunching stunt work, it wasn't enough that Boba Fett, without his armor, was using his gaffy stick, but you were actually watching ceramic pieces of their armor like fall away in large chunks, like they were like porcelain statues, and their bodies were bending over in angles that were never meant to be bent. So kudos for both the CGI and the stunt people, along with Fennec Shand's leap from the boulders backwards while firing her assault rifle, and I'm sure landing perfectly like a cat. You know, it looks great, but if you and I ever tried that, I think we'd end up with more than our share of bumps and bruises upon impact. But we have Gideon, we have Grogu. They can't communicate as he does with Ahsoka, but he conveys his point, particularly when he whips out the Darksaber. Says, "Oh, you can't have one of those yet," and then putting the shackles on him, and that, quite frankly, was disturbing to see this glorious, beautiful little child Jedi, subject of thousands of Disney-sponsored memorabilia, having the little binders on his wrist as he's worn down from using the Force. So we've really left our heroes in a pickle. No ship, no ward. I mean, what could possibly come next, Graying Jedi fans? You don't want to miss where Chapter 15 is going to take us, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Well, without further ado, shall we bestow upon this episode our Warp Core ratings? Like we did in the last episode, we're going to try this on the count of 3. Everybody's going to use their visual aid, which bestows the color of lightsaber upon this episode they give. So, gentlemen, 1, 2, 3. Wonderful. So I am going with the Live Long and Prosper Star Trek sticker green. I thought this was a brilliant episode. Action-packed, lots of cannon moving, which was always my favorite. As much as I do enjoy the Monster of the Week stuff, this was one of those episodes that really got me going. Psyllium Maas, I see you brought some psyllium husk. Tell us about it.
So yes, my parents actually were using this as a nutritional aid for the cat, their Tuca cat, and I think the name stuck, and that's how I was dubbed Psyllium Maas before the Jedi Masters came and took me to the temple on Coruscant. But we're going with the green labeled psyllium in this episode. Again, it has personality. It has moxie to spare, and it just feels like that adrenaline needle that John Travolta jams into Uma Thurman in Pulp Fiction. It's just an absolute blast where you're kind of watching it, for me, on sort of a bifurcated level. Because on the one hand, the intellectual side of me recognizes who's behind the camera and who's calling the shots and who's giving us the shots. So I'm watching a Rodriguez production, but I'm also fully enveloped in this Star Wars universe. And so it's a split screen that I think if you don't nail it, it becomes distraction, or even worse, upsetting the balance between light and dark. But I think here he absolutely knew the story he wanted to tell and how it fit into the larger narrative. And I look forward to his future involvement, perhaps with the Boba Fett character in future Star Wars adventures to come.
Give him the shot. Give it a shot. That's my...
Does I gotta stab you 3 times?
Give it a shot.
I gotta say, this is like the stupidest, like... I love that movie, but that's the dumbest line ever. So I stab her 3 times?
Give it a shot. It's like, it's so weird. I mean, just give it a shot. Anyway, please, that's my John Travolta. I gave it a blue because I'm kind of in. We've been referencing our Warp Core podcast a lot here, which rightfully so, because you can't find this content anywhere else. Whether it's Bill Paxton impressions, or it's William Shatner, or it's John Travolta, or...
You never know who's going to show up.
Or...
Good friend Hank Hill, who sells propane and propane accessories.
You don't get that content anywhere. So because of that, and I've been kind of pulling back some of my ratings on the Warp Core, I feel like I have to do so now as well. To me, it was a good episode. So I have to go with the blue. Again, I'm struggling a little bit with the Boba Fett stuff, obviously, and we'll struggle just that much more when we get to the actual Boba Fett series. Spoiler alert. But again, great episode. Just for me, not that green lightsaber that I've given out so much this year. But again, great episode.
Fair enough. Until we endeavor again into that galaxy far, far away, stick with us here on the Graying Jedi podcast. Make sure you're hitting that subscribe button here at Pending Rebrand. Stay up to date with all of our stuff. Refer back to our Jedi archives and other shows by diving into those playlists, heading over to our landing page, and don't forget to check out pendingrebrand.com. May the Force be with you.
And also with Luke.